Now, you're probably here watching this webinar because you're looking for information on something specific that you're facing. And that could be anything from maybe it's weight to migraines to hormonal issues, whatever that is. And you're probably, I'm guessing, at this point, not happy with the level of care you've been getting to this point. Whether it's medical, whether it's nutritional, you're not happy with how things are going, and you're really looking for better results. And so throughout the course of this webinar, I'm going to be talking about some different things. Because if we want different results, we need to do something different. And I want to suggest to you that all the things you might be dealing with, whatever they are not actually the problem. What you're seeing and experiencing are actually the results of the problem. Whether it's weight gain, thyroid issues, digestive issues, migraines, joint pain, whatever it is actually the result of a problem, not the problem in itself. Now, you might be on here thinking that I'm going to sell you something at the end of this. And if you are thinking that, then I've got really great news for you. I'm going to sell you something at the end of this. But let me put it like this. Who thinks knowledge is power? We've been told that before, right? I want to suggest that it's not. Knowledge is just information. It's not power until you act on it. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to act on the knowledge and the information that I'm going to give you here in this webinar at the end. And so if this resonates with you, and if you like this approach, then you're going to have an opportunity to act on that. And if it doesn't resonate with you, if it's not making sense to you, then that's okay too. Hopefully you will learn something that you can use to better your way of life.
The American healthcare system is badly broken.
The present system doesn't work, and it's going to take us down. We need a whole new kind of medicine.
We're in the grip of a very big industry, and it doesn't want to stop making money.
If I spend 5 minutes with you and then put in one of these stents, I probably get paid $1,500. For me to spend 45 minutes with a patient to try to figure out what their true problem is, probably get paid $15. It's a completely irrational system.
We don't have a healthcare system in this country. We have a disease management system.
We're spending almost twice as much in America as any other country on earth, but our lifespan isn't even in the top 20.
30,000 Medicare recipients die each year from care they didn't need. That's the equivalent of a jumbo jet crashing every single week. If the aviation industry killed as many people, we'd be up in arms.
The administration pays you based on how many patients you see. All right, who's next? If you try and buck the system, someone says, what can we do to get your productivity up? I'm not interested in getting my productivity up. I'm interested in helping patients.
We're seeing the military just being a microcosm of the problem society's having.
Soldiers' use of prescription drugs has tripled in the past 5 years.
This medications I was on.
Only by accepting that the American healthcare system is badly broken will we be able to seek out the escape fires, the potential solutions. There are answers.
One company has figured out how to lower healthcare costs by more than 40%.
We provide incentives for people to engage in healthier behaviors.
The Army Surgeon General directed that we establish the Pain Management Task Force to take a look at alternatives to narcotics.
I was skeptical, so skeptical.
I've gotten a lot of inspiration, a different perspective. There's a different way of doing things that is possible.
If I think about what healthcare could be like, it would have a lot more care in it.
The healthcare system is unsustainable. We're really mortgaging the future. Not just the health of healthcare, we're talking about the health of the nation.
If you get a chance, I highly recommend watching that movie. It's called Escape Fire, and it's all about, as you can see, a lot of the problems we're facing with our healthcare system today. Now, you probably agree with me that we have a health crisis. We're facing a health crisis in this country. And when I ask people what they think is causing that, I hear a lot of things from processed food, too much sugar, stressful lifestyles, pollution, all these different things. Now, is it because we don't have enough information that we have a health crisis? We have a lot of information, but it's coming from a lot of different places as well. You can probably finish this sentence for me. Milk, it does the body good. Very clever marketing campaign. Was it the health industry that told you milk does the body good? Or was it the dairy industry? It was the dairy industry. So there's a lot of information out there, and sifting through it and finding what's real and what's not is a difficult thing to do. Now, do you think pharmaceuticals are helping our health crisis? You know, the US, in terms of overall health, sits at around number 47 of developed countries, and yet we spend far, far more on prescription drugs than any other country. In fact, the US makes up about 5% of the world's population, and we use about 50% of the world's drugs. And yet, do we have more heart disease today, more diabetes, more cancer, more autism? So clearly, this system is not working. Does somebody with a headache have a Tylenol deficiency? Does a diabetic have a metformin deficiency? But the good news about all this is that 70% of disease is what's known as chronic disease, and that means it's lifestyle dependent. And that's good news because we have great control over our lifestyle and our environment. So you might be thinking, well, you know, it's a genetic thing. So do genetics play a role? Yeah, they play a role, but far, far smaller than what you might think. Maybe about 5%, because what people confuse is genetic potential versus genetic expression. So when somebody says, my father has this, my grandfather has this, so on and so on, I'm going to get this as well because it runs in my family, what they are talking about is genetic potential. Yes, you might have the diabetes gene. Yes, you might have the Alzheimer's gene. But that gene will only express itself based on the environment provided to that gene. 85% of all medical procedures and surgeries are scientifically unproven. BBC came out with an article a while back saying that as a whole, drugs and procedures have about 7% efficacy. And yet we continue to put pink ribbons on our shirts and pink socks on our football players, thinking that somehow less women are going to have their breasts removed. And yet we know that's not what we're seeing. 90% of all diseases prevalent today are not treatable with orthodox medical procedures. 90%. Now the other 10%, let me explain the difference. If you have a life-threatening bacterial infection, you go to the doctor, he's going to give you an antibiotic to kill off that bad bacteria. That will fix the problem. It may cause other problems in the process, but it will fix that immediate problem. If you have heart disease, you're going to be on a lifetime of drug therapy, so that doesn't fix the problem. It's like if the warning light comes on in your car to say there's a problem with the engine, so you take it to the mechanic, and he doesn't lift the hood, he just resets it and turns the light off. The next morning, that light comes back on. You take it to the mechanic, he doesn't lift the hood, he just resets it and the light goes off. There's not going to be too many mornings like that go by before you say, wait, something's not right here. This mechanic is not fixing the problem. And yet that's exactly what we're doing with our bodies when we're on these other kinds of drugs. When we take heart disease medication or blood pressure or diabetes that are just maintaining and managing a chronic disease is never fixing the underlying cause of that disease. So if 85% of drugs and procedures are ineffective and 90% are unproven, clearly the answer must be just to make more better drugs. 1 in every 5 new drugs ends up causing serious harm, while only 1 in 10 shows any substantial benefit when compared to an existing established drug. So that can't be good. Clearly we're not moving ahead in this industry. And then let's talk about side effects. I saw a TV commercial recently for a bladder incontinence drug, and one of the side effects said may cause diarrhea. So basically you've traded the drips for the squirts. How is that any better? And then of course we all love this one, in rare cases death. Now I'd like to talk about that word rare for a second. In a country of 300 million people, if 5 people died in a year from a correctly prescribed prescription drug, would you consider that rare? I think that's pretty rare. What about 10? That's still pretty rare. What about 125,000? Now we're not talking about rare at this point, we're talking about an epidemic. And the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, estimates that 125,000 people die in the US every single year from correctly prescribed prescription drugs. I'm not talking about incorrectly prescribed, overdoses, illicitly used. I'm not talking about side effects that may be related back to the drug. I'm talking about the actual drug, correctly prescribed and used, kills 125,000 people every year in this country. The Journal of American Medical Association reported in 1995 that there is no evidence linking high cholesterol levels in women with heart disease. Now, when did this come out? 2 decades ago. And yet how many women have been prescribed a cholesterol-lowering drug, a statin drug, in the last 2 decades with the intention of reducing one's risk of heart disease? They hand those drugs out like cotton candy at a rodeo. And yet we've known for 20 years almost that it actually does nothing to prevent heart disease. And the same is true of men. We've just learned that more recently. And yet the American Medical Association has lowered what they consider to be safe levels of cholesterol twice during that time. And the only way to get it to what they suggest now is using a statin drug. Now, why would the American Medical Association do that? Surely we can trust them. Well, I don't know, but it might interest you to know that 95% of their revenue comes from pharmaceutical advertising in their journals. Do you think there could be a conflict of interest? So anyway, your doctor puts you on your statin drug, and you go back for a checkup a few months later, and it's down to what he considers a good range. And so you say, great, doc, I can come off my medication now. And he says, oh, no. How long do you have to be on that drug for? The rest of your life. What about your diabetes drug? The rest of your life. And here we are back to that engine light scenario again. All we're doing is turning that light off and resetting it every single morning and never looking at the underlying cause. But of course, drugs and procedures is what your insurance covers, things that don't work. Now let's talk about insurance for a moment. There's another crime. We call it health insurance. Does it cover a gym membership? Does it cover whole organic foods? Does it cover a nutritional education? No, it's going to pay for drugs and procedures that are unproven, ineffective, and are killing us at epidemic proportions. So it's really not health insurance at all, is it? It's disease insurance. Does life insurance cover life? No, it pays out when you're dead. Health insurance pays out when you're sick. And how much will you pay into your health insurance over the course of 10 years? Do you think your insurance is ever going to pay out more than you're paying in? No way. And it gives us a false sense of security. We think that it will magically get us out of trouble if we're in trouble, rather than thinking about how we might protect our health today. And what about Medicare? Who controls that? The government. So they're really controlling us. So when reimbursement drops by 20%, the doctor says, well, I need to see this many more patients in an hour. So instead of spending 10 minutes with a patient, I'm going to spend 7 minutes with the patient. And let's say somebody comes in and the doctor runs some labs and says, okay, look, you've got insulin resistance and you're diabetic, so I'm going to put you on some metformin. Things are in a bad way, so you need some bariatric surgery, and let's take your gallbladder out while we're at it, just in case that's a problem. Now, there's about $35,000 in procedures there, and the doctor might make around $1,500. Now, if that same person comes back with those labs, and the doctor says, listen, you're insulin resistant, you're diabetic, but I don't want to put you on a lifetime of drug therapy. This is a chronic disease that we can reverse through lifestyle. So I'm going to get you set up with my nutritionist, coming in every couple of weeks and being accountable to them. They're going to teach you how to eat low glycemic so you can manage that blood sugar. And we're going to turn the ship around and get you living the right way to maintain health for the rest of your life. Now, the doctor spent a lot longer than 7 minutes for that consultation, and he probably made about $15. So why is he going to do it? He's got bills to pay. He's got a $500,000 student loan to pay off. And he won't be able to keep his doors open if he does that. So he has to recommend drugs and procedures. Okay? And it's not the doctor's fault. There's a lot of good, hard-working doctors who care and have great intentions and good integrity in this country, but they are handcuffed in this system. And if they want to get paid, this is how they have to do it. How does this image make you feel? It might even be amusing for a brief moment until the reality of this sinks in. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a sick, sick nation and world that is only getting sicker by the day. And it just doesn't have to be that way. Many health experts today say they worry U.S. children will not outlive their parents. It's from the Center for Disease Control. Now, I'll be 40 next birthday, and I don't have children yet, so obviously I'm going to be an older father. But the idea of burying my child because he or she died of an unnecessary, reversible disease, while some people sat back in their fancy suits and fancy offices and lined their pockets of my child's short and miserable life, is not an option for me. And it shouldn't be an option for anyone out there. And some people just don't have the motivation to take control of their health for themselves, and they might need that extra push. If you can't do it for yourself, then do it for your loved ones. Do it for those who depend on you, your children, your grandchildren. Sometimes it takes that extra push for people to really get serious about their health. Have you ever heard somebody say that heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me? That stroke was the best thing that ever happened to me? Does that mean they really enjoyed that experience? No, of course not. But what it means is it gave them a wake-up call. It gave them a second chance to say, you know what, let's get things back on track. I want to be here for a little longer. I want to be around those I love for a little longer. But you know who doesn't say that was the best thing that ever happened to them? Those that don't get that second chance. So this is the system we have. But if we want different results, we need to do something different. So let me tell you about who I am and how I operate. I'm a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and my training is in a thing called functional medicine. Functional medicine or functional nutrition is always looking at causal factors behind disease. Rather than trying to diagnose what disease you have, functional care is saying, why do you have disease? Now, I'm sure you've been to a doctor at some point because you had symptoms. And so you went to the doctor, and what you want is relief from those symptoms. Now, this is what we call relief care or allopathic care. Now, let's say that symptom was insomnia. So you go to the doctor and you say, doctor, I need some relief from my symptom of insomnia. And the doctor says, okay, here's some sleeping pills. Now, maybe you're a little health conscious and you've heard those things can be dangerous and addictive. So then you go to a nutritionist and say, I have insomnia, I have the symptom, and I want relief. So the nutritionist says, here's some melatonin or maybe some valerian root or something like that. And this is what we call relief care. Okay, and it's just to provide relief. Functional care is not stopping there. It's saying, okay, you have insomnia. Why do you have insomnia? And to better help me explain this style of functional care, I like to use this brain-body diagram designed by a guy called Dr. David Singer. Now, we have a brain, obviously, and the brain connects with the body and communicates with the body in a number of different ways, and some of the main ways here are nerves and hormones, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about hormones in this webinar because the title of this webinar is Stress and Hormones. And the reason the brain communicates with the body is to provide function. So when the brain speaks to a muscle group and tells that muscle to contract, that's the function of that muscle. Now, the great thing about our body is that we don't have to tell it how to function. We don't have to tell our cells how to be good cells and our organs what to do. Our body knows. It's designed and evolved perfectly, so it actually knows what to do. And when it's given the right environment, the brain is communicating with the body, it's providing function, and you have a 100% function. We call this normal. This is the normal place to be at. And then when you're in this normal place, you're in a state of ease. And the medical term for that is homeostasis or perfect balance. But of course, this is not how we tend to show up at the doctor's office or how people tend to come and see me. They tend to come with things like what we call symptoms. But how can you have symptoms if you have full function and you're in a state of ease? Well, now we're in a state of dis-ease. We're in a dis-ease process, and it's because we have malfunction. Something went wrong with that communication from the brain to the body and has caused malfunction. And this is not normal. Now, if you get nothing else out of this webinar, I really want you to take this home. These things are not normal, whatever you're facing. And a lot of times we justify these things by saying, well, I'm putting on weight, but that's normal for my age. I'm getting a little slower, a little fatigued, but that's normal. How about this one? I don't recover from a night out like I used to, but that's normal. Okay? These things are not normal, they're common. And it's very, very important to understand that common does not equal normal. Now notice that symptoms are the very last thing to show up here. First you had malfunctions, you entered into a dis-ease process, and then the symptoms showed up. Now what can cause these malfunctions? What can cause this breakdown in communication from the brain to the body? All comes down to one very technical medical term: stress. Now when I say the word stress, many people at that point think of things like finances or relationships or career, job, that kind of thing. And all these things can be summed up as the first kind of stress, which is mental emotional stress. Mental emotional stress is something we all have and we all will have until the day we die. Sometimes in our lives are worse than others, sometimes we handle it better than other times, but it's always going to be there. But there are actually a couple of other kinds of stress that I want to talk about as well. Secondly, we have biomechanical, which is physical stress. This might be if you've been involved in an accident, you have some kind of trauma. Perhaps we've got a fused spine or a slipped disc. These can cause all sorts of problems as well, especially in the spine. It can cause neurotransmitter damage and all sorts of problems like that. So these are very serious kinds of stress that can break down the function of our body. But the third kind that I really spend most of my time talking about and focusing on is biochemical stress. And biochemical stress can be anything from toxicities to deficiencies, malabsorption, malnutrition, hormonal imbalances, immune dysfunction, and even things like parasitic infestations, bacterial and fungal overgrowths, and the list goes on. So biochemical stresses can be a great many things, and these really begin to break down the function of the body and cause to this dis-ease process and ultimately symptoms. And I spend a lot of time in this area and have a methodology that can really get to the underlying cause of this by looking at these biochemical stresses. So now you have symptoms, and you go to your doctor and you want relief, all right? Now the first kind of relief care the doctor's going to give you is likely drugs. And now sometimes these drugs work for a little while and then they stop working. So then the next line of defense is probably stronger drugs, or maybe just add to what you're already taking. And then of course the ultimate form of relief care is surgery. They just start cutting pieces out of you. But look what happens when we get this relief care. Symptoms go away. So are we all better? No, we're not. We've still got malfunctions and we're still in a dis-ease process. So what can we expect to happen is that we can expect those symptoms to come back, and often worse than they were in the first place. So functional medicine or functional nutrition is a different kind of care. It's not relief care, it's what we call corrective care. Corrective care always works at a subclinical level. Again, that means we're not diagnosing disease. Disease is at a clinical level, and that's where a doctor looks. We're looking subclinically for dysfunction. We look for healing opportunities. Healing opportunities looks at a dysfunctional system and says, here's an opportunity to restore function and improve health. And it's very functional, and it always asks why. Not what disease do you have, but why do you have disease? And when we work this way, we start from the other end. Rather than chasing symptoms that's done at a clinical level, we address function. So we begin to restore function to the body. That puts the body back in a state of ease. And then because we worked very non-specifically chasing symptoms, the symptoms just naturally go away because the body is then allowed to heal itself, like it so desperately wants to do. And again, we call this normal. Now here's some very common signs of stress that people often overlook and ignore. If you've had any of these things in the last 3 or 4 months, then your body is in a state of stress. And again, if it's mental, emotional, physical, you probably know about it. If it's biochemical, you may not know about it. So you may be wondering what's causing some of these things like headaches, depression, hot flashes, osteoporosis, poor memory, moodiness, digestive problems. If you've had any of these things in the last few months, then you're in a state of stress. And if you've had more than one of these things in the last few months, then your body is really beginning to break down. And again, it's like that engine light in the car. That engine light is coming on saying something's wrong here, this needs attention. Now, in keeping with the topic of this talk, which is stress and hormones, I want to talk about a specific hormone that we call cortisol, which comes from our adrenal glands. Now, cortisol is very often called the stress hormone because it's produced in response to stress, and it comes from the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands are little walnut-sized glands that sit on top of our kidneys. Now, cortisol is produced on what we call a circadian rhythm. And that means as diurnal beings, as opposed to nocturnal beings, we produce a lot more cortisol in the morning, and then gradually that comes down through the day. And then as we sleep, it gradually creeps up again to peak at the morning. And that's our circadian rhythm. Now, in the course of 24 hours, if you're in a good state of homeostasis and everything's operating the way it should be, you'll produce between 23 and 42 nanomoles daily output. Now, unless you're a very rare person, then I would imagine you have stress in your life, whether it's mental, emotional, biomechanical, or biochemical, you have some sort of stress. So an appropriate response from the adrenal glands at that point is to produce more cortisol. Now, notice I say appropriate. So if cortisol is all bad, how can more of it be appropriate? Well, let's look at some of the things that it does for us. Firstly, it's an anti-inflammatory and painkiller. You might have noticed that your mosquito bites are really itchy at night when you're trying to go to sleep, and then in the morning you barely notice them. And that's because you've got a lot more cortisol in the morning, which is that anti-inflammatory. It enhances activity of epinephrine and norepinephrine and lasts a lot longer. which most people know those things as adrenaline. It raises blood sugar. Now, we often think of that as a bad thing, but when you need energy, that's a good thing. If you've got a deadline on the desk and you haven't had a lot of sleep, then a little bit of elevated blood sugar to give you energy to get through the day is not a bad thing, and the elevated cortisol will help that. It aids in fat, protein, and carbohydrate metabolism, and it increases glucose utilization by the central nervous system. So it does a lot of great things, and when we're stressed, we absolutely need a little more of it. But the thing is, eventually, if we have ongoing, chronic, unresolved stress, our adrenal glands will get tired, and that cortisol production will come down. How long it stays up here really depends on what kind of stress you're under and the genetic potential of your adrenals, but eventually it will have to come down. Now, how you felt when you were up at the top there was probably pretty good, because even though you're under a lot of stress, your body is adapting appropriately to that and responding appropriately to that, so you probably felt quite good. But as you start to come down the other side here, we enter into a thing we call FLC syndrome. And you may not have heard of this, but it stands for feels like crap syndrome. And it's a very common thing. And there's a lot of people out there walking around with this FLC syndrome, feeling like crap, and they don't know why. They might think their life is the same, they're under the same amount of stress as they used to be, and yet for some reason their body is just not coping with it as well as it used to. And this is where a lot of people start to self-medicate. And by self-medicate, I mean, you've probably heard somebody say, well, my weight's just getting out of control, I'm going to join the gym this year. Or I'm going to start eating better now. Or I'm going to take my multivitamin. Or maybe it's even just I'm going to drink extra coffee to get me through the day. But one way or another, when you start to enter in this FLC syndrome, you start to self-medicate and try to take control of things yourself. And up here is what we call stage 1 adrenal fatigue. Down in the middle we see stage 2, and the bottom here we see stage 3. Most people will start to come to see us or maybe go see a doctor as they're entering to stage 2 or stage 3 adrenal fatigue. But as people are entering into stage 2 adrenal fatigue, conventional medicine will have a real hard time figuring out what's going wrong. And here's why. You might notice this area here looks very similar to this area over here. And remember I said if somebody's operating in a full state of function and ease and homeostasis, they're producing between 23 and 42 nanomoles every day. And yet here we are still in the same range over here. So when you go to a doctor, if they want to test your adrenals, they're going to do a 24-hour output test. They're going to do probably a urine test and test how much cortisol you've produced in the last 24 hours. And if it comes up in what they consider this normal range between 23 and 42, they're going to say there's really nothing wrong. And yet we know there's something wrong because you feel like crap. So does it make sense that it was unresolved chronic stress that pushed the cortisol up here into this stage to begin with? And then it's that unresolved chronic stress that's fatigued your adrenals to the point that it's now coming back down here. So the best way to test your adrenals is not with a 24-hour urine sample. We actually test it 4 times through the day using saliva. And the reason we test it 4 times through the day at morning, noon, afternoon, and evening is so that we can test not just your daily output, but we can actually look at what's going on with your circadian rhythm. So when we look at the morning, we might see everything looks absolutely normal. That's exactly where we'd expect it to be. Noontime, same thing. Afternoon, low. Something went wrong. What's happening there? Evening is elevated. Something went wrong. So even though we have 2 markers on this test that show us something is wrong with the adrenals, they're not functioning like they should be, this elevated evening may have dragged the low afternoon up so that you land in what would be considered a normal range, and yet we know that it's not normal. And by the way, there's no stage 4 adrenal fatigue, there's just failure and death. And I don't mean your failure and death necessarily, I mean failures of cells and systems and a lifetime of drug therapy. Now if all these markers were low, morning, noon, afternoon, and evening, if they were all low, then your total output would be low, and what a doctor would be looking for when he tests that is a thing called Addison's disease. And any doctor could see if you had Addison's disease, you've got next to no cortisol, and they would treat that with maybe hydrocortisone treatment or something like that. But again, we're not looking for disease, we're looking for dysfunction. Now why do we care about the adrenal glands so much? Well, they control a great many areas of the body, as you can see here. Your ovarian hormones, anybody concerned with those? Thyroid function, the pancreas, this produces several really important hormones like insulin and glucagon for energy. Bone turnover, another big one, also controlled by your adrenals. And when I say controlled, what I mean is they influence either directly or indirectly. And by modulating and regulating these areas of the body, they can have a really significant effect on a great many areas of your health. Neuronal conductivity, which can have a huge effect on some pretty significant areas like learning, sleep, memory. Carb, fat, protein metabolism. Do you think these have something to do with blood sugar regulation, weight loss, weight gain? And not the least of which, a thing called your mucosal barrier. Your mucosal barrier is like your inside skin. It's the thing that separates us from all the nasty things we ingest. We've all seen a dog drink dirty water perhaps and not get sick. Well, it's because they have a very strong functional mucosal barrier. We constantly ingest bacteria, virus, fungus, and even parasites, but a strong and functional mucosal barrier will prevent these things from getting into general circulation and making us sick. Now here's some of the body types we see with hormonal dysregulation. Now this is not diagnostic, obviously, but here's some of the things we often see. If you have an estrogen dominance, you can gain weight in the hips, the butt, the lower tummy. It's typically a cellulite kind of fat. The adrenal body type, often referred to as a spare tire or a muffin top, it stores fat in the belly. The thyroid type, you've got weight gain all over, often hanging from the arms. Just a very, very slow metabolism, very hard to lose weight with that. And then the liver type, we call this an insulin-resistant type, where you're thin all over with a pot belly. We sometimes call that a beer belly, but it's really a liver belly, and it's very often associated with pre-diabetics. And your liver works in conjunction with every single one of these hormones. Now, we've pointed out a few things that don't work and why things are not working. I think it would be fair at this point to show you what does. First off, nutrition and exercise. Can you be healthy without the right nutrition and without exercise? You cannot. It's impossible. But there are so many misconceptions around nutrition and exercise, and really keeping up with the latest science and the things we learn and understand is virtually a full-time job. Exercise, for example. A lot of people over-exercise and some people don't exercise at all. If you're exercising right, you can do it for 30 to 35 minutes 2 to 3 times a week. Do you think you can make time for that? Because if you can't make time for that, you'll have to make time to be sick. There's really nothing in between. Now, you could be eating in the Garden of Eden and eating all the most nutritious foods in the world, but if you have a toxic system and a toxic overload on the body and you have a messed up digestion, you are not absorbing those nutrients. You've all heard the old adage, you are what you eat. I think a more accurate, perhaps less catchy, but more accurate adage would be, you are what you absorb. And again, you could be eating all the best foods, but if you've got a messed up stomach and gut and digestive system and a toxic overload on the body, you are not absorbing that. Now, we all know that our main detoxifying organ is our liver. And livers are very, very often congested, and we think of alcohol as being one of the common offenders for that, which it is. But many other common offenders are things like medications, things like hormonal imbalances. The liver has to clear the body of excess estrogens. Parasites, bacteria, viruses, the liver has to filter the blood for all these kinds of things. So there are many, many things that can mess up and congest your liver. Now, if your liver is congested, being your main detoxifying organ, then so are all your other detoxifying organs. Things like your lymphatic system, your colon, your kidney, your lungs, and even your skin. And many people get skin complaints and think it's just dry weather or they need a more expensive skin cream. And oftentimes it's because they have a toxic burden on the body that starts from the inside. Hormones. You cannot be healthy with hormones that are out of balance. Now, the hormones control a great many things. There's about 600 hormones in the body. And if you have adrenal dysregulation or cortisol dysregulation, that's going to affect so many different other hormones as well, which are going to lead to a poor breakdown of your body and poor health. So your hormones must be balanced. Your immune system, I mentioned before, your mucosal barrier. Now, many people think of our immune function as like we have an immune organ. Well, we don't have an immune organ. We have many, many different components to our immune function. But one of those main components is our mucosal barrier. If that is broken down, then our immunity is greatly compromised. Something like 80% of our immunity comes from our gut. So that's very, very important. Now, how are you going to know all these things and how are you going to learn all these things without a system and a structure and a coach and a mentor? And this is the final missing piece. The word doctor comes from the Latin word that means to teach. A doctor's teaching us about nutrition and balancing hormones and how to exercise correctly. Chances are they're not. So somebody has to do it. Have you ever had a coach or a mentor for anything at all? Maybe a musical instrument, maybe on a sports team, maybe a business mentor? Could you have learned to do those things on your own? Possibly to a point, yeah, you might have got somewhat proficient at it. But could you have done it better with that coach or with that mentor, with that teacher? You absolutely could. Now, I've had various mentors in my life, and from sports to music, and currently I have several mentors in functional nutrition or functional medicine. And this is one of the key reasons I see the results that I see in the people that I work with, because I am constantly learning. And what I learn, I pass on and I teach those that I work with. And that's the value of having a system and a coach, someone that is going to pass on this education, and that way you'll get permanence and independence in your newfound health. And this is how we operate at Perfect Health Project. We treat the whole person by putting all these pieces together. We give you an education on nutrition and exercise. We give you an education on digestion and detoxification, hormone balancing, your immune function, and then it's all within a system, and you have a coach and a mentor to take you through that program. And this is why we get the results we get. And we test, don't guess. We're not just guessing about your digestion and your hormones and your immune function. We test, we do functional lab work to see exactly what's going on the inside and work out an individual and tailored protocol that's just for you based on what we see in the labs. 94% of all failure is due to not having a system. So you might be thinking, I've tried a program like this before. I've gone to Jenny Craig, or I joined a gym, or I did this. If you didn't have a system, it's a very good reason why it might not have worked out for you. Also, what might not have worked out is that you didn't cover all these 5 pillars. Did you deal with your hormone balancing? Did you deal with nutrition and exercise? Did you deal with your immune function? And did you have a coach to take you through the whole thing? Now, the most important thing I've discussed in this presentation is action. I said before that knowledge is not power. Acting on knowledge is power. 48 hours from now, you'll probably remember about 7% of what you've just learned. And a big problem that we have in this country is that we procrastinate. And we think we're safe because we have insurance. Now, the fact that you're watching this presentation is a very great step in the right direction. But where you go from here will help set the stage for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Everything you've done up to this point, the environment you've provided for your body and the lifestyle you've lived has determined the point where you're at right now. What you do from now on will determine where your health goes in the coming decades. Now, if you looked at that earlier slide of some of the common signs of stress, and you checked off more than 2 boxes there, which direction do you think you're heading in right now? Now, another reason that we get the great results we get at Perfect Health Project is that we don't take everyone on. We purposely limit the amount of people we work with so that we can really dedicate our time and energy to people who are going to participate with us. We call the people we work with practice members. We don't call them clients or patients. We refer to them as practice members because they're entering into a partnership with us and a membership with us where they're working with us. We take A students and B students, but we can't take C students. An A student is someone who says, I get this functional approach. I understand it, it makes sense to me, it resonates with me, and I want to do this. I am ready to take control of my health today. A B student is basically the same, but they might say, but sometimes I lack discipline, sometimes I'm not going to need you to help me up and pull me back into the game again. And that's okay, and that's part of having a system and a coach. That's what we're there for. But a C student is someone who says, well, I just need to think about this. And the reason we can't take a C student is because the reality is they don't need to think about it. They know whether this is right for them or not right for them. What they're actually saying is, I'm not willing to make this a priority in my life right now. There are other things that I could be doing. I'm not ready to give this up or to take this action. And we can't work with people like that because we can't get the same results with them. Now, if you're listening to this and you think that the C student describes how you're feeling, that's okay. There's no judgment here. You're going to be ready when you're ready. And of course, when you are ready, you know how to find us. Now, for those of you who thought you were an A or a B student, I'm going to encourage you to take action at this point and set up a meeting. We're going to do a complete wellness evaluation and consultation and set up a plan of action and talk about which curriculum is best for you. Now I call it a curriculum because it's educational. The people we work with at Perfect Health Project get an education that's going to give them permanence and independence in their health for the rest of their life. And there are several curriculums to choose from in group form or individual form. And after our wellness evaluation, we'll decide which one's going to be best suited for you. So Perfect Health Project doesn't have a physical office, very intentionally, and that enables us to work with people all over the world. Now there are some differences here than when you go see your doctor. How much is that doctor's visit? Now your first answer is probably going to be $20 or $50 or whatever your copay is. But I'm not talking about how much you paid, I'm talking about how much was billed for that visit. Now depending on where you live, that could be a few $100s, or if you live in Manhattan like I do, it could be over $1,000. And how long did you have to wait to see the doctor? Maybe a half hour? I've heard of people waiting 90 minutes. And then when you got in to see the doctor, you probably spent anywhere from 7 to 15 minutes. And you may not have even seen the doctor. You might have seen a PA or a nurse. Now, if you had to pay anywhere from a few $100s to $1,000 to see a PA for 7 minutes and had to wait 90 minutes to do it, would you pay that out of your own pocket? Would you keep going? And if the answer is no, I'm going to suggest you don't see an equal exchange of value. So I want you to ask yourself, how long should I spend with you? And the answer to that question is as long as it takes. These consultations generally take at least an hour. Now, is it fair that I have a fee for that? My usual fee for a consultation is $187. But because you've listened to this presentation, I'm going to take $100 off that, and your total investment is only going to be $87. Now, there are a couple of reasons I do this. Number one, because you don't really know Perfect Health Project that well yet, you may not fully understand this functional approach and you need to know a little more. And I want to remove any financial barrier you have in taking that first step toward taking control of your health. Now, this doesn't really cover our time. So if it doesn't cover our time, why charge it at all? And the answer to that is we want the people we work with to have skin in the game. That means we want the people we're working with to be as invested in their health as we are. We want the people that we work with to say, I'm serious about this, I'm going to participate in this, I'm going to get involved in this, and I need to have skin in the game to show that. Now, if you have a spouse or a significant other, it's absolutely imperative that they are there with you on this call. The reason for that is we want them to be involved in this process from the beginning. Whether or not they're doing it with you doesn't matter. It's important that they're involved and they understand and they can support you in the right way. Now, if your spouse or significant other also wants a consultation and wellness evaluation, their investment is just $47. But whether they want that or not, it's really important that they're involved with you and they're participating with you right from the beginning. Now, I just want to answer some really common questions before I end, and if you have more questions, then that's fine. You can go ahead and contact us below. The first question is, can we help everybody? And the answer is obviously no. But here's the thing, we will say yes to most people. If we know that that person is committed and they're an A or a B student, we will work with them and we'll help them regain control of their health. Do we take insurance? Well, it's not that we don't take insurance, but as we discussed earlier, insurance doesn't cover anything that works. This works. Is it affordable? Absolutely. Many of our practice members are single parents, retired, fixed income and such, and we can always find a program that works for them. Do we have payment options? Absolutely. We want to make it possible for everybody to take control of their health, so we make that as easy as we possibly can. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any other questions before you book that appointment, go ahead and contact us below. Otherwise, just go ahead and book that appointment below, and we'll be in touch with you within 24 hours to confirm a time. Have a great day.